Okay, this lesson for the Koine Project Class, I'd like to demonstrate the why. Why is it, and what is the rationale behind the reality that you cannot improve upon or improve something called Calvinism. I'll use a construct. You cannot improve a construct like Calvinism, for example, because it would no longer exist. Illustration, I try to do that, but my children call this a smartphone. They call it a phone, but I told them years ago when I first had my son, who's a computer geek, wanted me to finally get a smartphone. I have a granddaughter. She's 14 now. And he said I could take photographs. Well, I took it and had it in a little small case that it was actually a micro tool case for computer repair. So I bought it, removed the tools. I remember giving the micro screwdrivers, to a person working at a booth that repaired cell phones. And I asked them if they'd put a safety cover. So then I placed it inside this small bag that was designed to hold micro screwdrivers, and I placed the charger wire in it, and I carried it like that everywhere I went. Man, my son found it hysterical that I was carrying this in a bag, and I said, well, it's like a computer case. I don't want to, and I now toss it in my pocket and whatever. But I was at a garage sale recently, and this was acquired, and it's a phone. But now this is kind of a modern, it's got buttons on it and speakerphone, so this isn't as old as I would like to have seen, but this could be improved upon, and we could have improvements, and you still have a phone. But if you were to improve on a construct, in academia and education, it originally is intended, a mental model is intended for educational purposes, to help, like scaffolding, to get you started, and you can evaluate it, review, revise it. Kaizen, Kai means continuous Zen improvement. In the workplace, for example, you always want to improve productivity, reduce cost, improve safety of operations, all those things that go into the greater outcome and a return on the investment for a stakeholder. So a phone, for example, it's interdependent. Its working parts interdepend, and you can evaluate it. I'm old enough to remember when the first computer in an organization where I worked, they brought it in and placed it on the desk, had this huge TV screen on top, cathode ray tube. It just looked like a television to me. And they explained the hard drive, and by the time they were finished, I said, that sounds like a miniature record player. And then they had a telephone line shoved in the back, and then a typewriter, keyboard, they said, in front. So I didn't really see anything new about it, rather innovative in how they had brought these pieces together. And of course, we click now and use software and things like that. But Calvinism, for example, as a construct, so if anyone takes it personal, it's a codependency. Each of these codepend upon the other. They're not interdependent in that they would then be resilient or invite evaluation and improvement, where you can take the 5 points and now you have the excellent edition. The Excel comes out or a new edition, like we do in textbooks in academia, where we get our new edition of our calculus book, where some advanced feature or insights brought into the equation, so that in this book we can learn it and stay current with our knowledge. Like my son has to constantly study in the computer industry. It's now every day. So if you had certification, let's say a few years ago, and went into an entry-level position, you'd be obsolete by now if you weren't constantly improving. And we learned in this class, for example, if we just took the word depravity, which there's a lot of descriptions about it, a lot of what we'd say, it's a lot of things that would fall in a category called qualify, and rather than quantify. So we noticed that if we just look for a lexical definition, Now, what really helped us was a scholar named Dr. W.A. Dillard, and he noticed that total hereditary depravity, he said, if it's depravity of the total man. So he showed where the adjective total could be moved and should be properly placed based on what he knew the Bible to say. So he first distilled it down to depravity of total man, of the total man. There we go, the total man, rather than total depravity. Now, of course, you've heard Calvinists say, well, we mean by total, we don't mean utter. And then the same Calvinists accuse an Arminian of teaching diminished depravity, which somewhere between diminished, total, and utter, you find what's the difference between diminishing utter depravity down to total. So it's not something you would expect, except in codependency. It's a reliance upon something that actually, in psychology, it's a debilitating and can diminish and debilitate. In this banter you hear out there, if you were in an academic environment, if you were between your chemistry and calculus class and you try to drop this in, you'd be asked a lot of questions that you wouldn't be prepared to answer from a quantitative view. For example, the teacher would say, what's the lexical definition? And you wouldn't know G4190, paneros, and you wouldn't know to go to the Septuagint, Genesis 2:9, and then you wouldn't know to look at both of these, evaluate this text with the Koine, Matthew 7:11. And that would find you noticing that your entire construct now is unraveling because of the superiority and sufficiency of the scriptures on this particular topic. So Genesis 2:9, that particular tree of the consequence to have noticed and continue to notice a knowable thing. We've gone through that before. And that knowable thing, the good conjoined with evil, and good and evil, that's a conjunction, conjoin the two. And then in Matthew 7:11, Jesus said, while being evil ones, you all have noticed and continue to notice to be doing good things. So that was interesting that if you just, again, we can't improve Calvinism. I work with organizations of all types, whether it's a manufacturing or sales or management of, let's say, multi-unit apartment complexes or physical plant maintenance, whatever it is. We quantify it and we improve it, the efficiency. And yet we can't, this is nothing that can be improved. It evaporates the moment you, for example, provide a lexical definition. And then, or for example, something our Greek teacher, Dr. Murray, always emphasized was inflectional morphemes. And he noticed, would always emphasize kind of action in Koine Greek. Koine Greek. And then he would emphasize the verb stems in Hebrew, for example. So look what came of that. Again, we can't improve the construct Calvinism, because as soon as we tamper with it, unlike an interdependent system, a telephone, that was even instrumental and is a chief part of the computer eventually, without that landline, you see, and a part called a typewriter. We could take the keyboard and something called a record player where there's information transmitted through that vinyl record or whatever it is. Now we have all the other things, and now we have microprocessors. We still have computers, but again, we can improve those. We can improve our knowledge of the Bible. We just cannot improve Calvinism. Of these two things, one thing came out was the blind spot in Calvinism was the finite verb, believe, pistuo, That's the lexical listing. So it's I am believing, ing, finite verb. And then, of course, the one who is believing, pisteuon, that is the present active participle, the one who is believing. And you remember there was an axiom that said regeneration precedes faith. And we noticed because this is something that we would call quantifiable or mathological. We would call this mathological, quantifiable. We have these, and we didn't study our verb charts and all that for nothing, just to run into something that's allergic to it. And it certainly doesn't hold any implication on those I collaborate with as pastors of churches. We did not engage in a New Testament church so that we could be there to labor in word and doctrine just to say, okay, well, let's just play along with these constructs. And I'm using Calvinism since so many people seem to have more volumes written about it. But here we notice that the axiom of regeneration precedes faith. Faith. We learned that Paul himself, the high scholastic, Paul the apostle, Paul, well, I call him Paul the academic because, they tell me he's really the sharp guy out there. So let's go to the sharp guy, the smart man. Galatians 2:16, he said, eidates, as ones who have noticed and continue to notice. Now, I can't write it all out, but here's the good news he said he noticed. The good news that no kind of man, that word man is mankind, no kind of man, Jew nor Greek, male nor female, bond or free, is being justified out from any kind of works of any kind of law except through, that is by the means of and through Jesus Christ faithfulness, possessive, subjective, possessive, genitive, his faithfulness. We're declared right out from that. So he said, when we notice that, this is that causal participle, which I like to call it that persuasive one. Persuasive, it's what persuaded Paul. He said, even we ourselves, Kai, even we ourselves, epistusamen, even we ourselves believed. Remember, Dr. Murray said kind of action and the inflectional morpheme. So even we ourselves, and this is how and why you won't find pastors of the Lord's churches following men and trends and or nor, especially not constructs that can't even be evaluated in light of Scripture. So even we ourselves believed, of course, into Jesus Christ. So he said, here was the adverb, which participles are verbal substantives, and they also can function adjectively. In this case, it's adverbally modifying this finite verb believe, simple form of action. So we don't have a form of genao, generate. And whatever this statement is, it can't be, it not only can't be improved, it can't even be evaluated, because as soon as you ask the wrong question, there's an allergy, an aversion, a bias, both cognitive and affective, emotional, because the T and the U and the L and the I and the P, that's all a codependent system, not interdependent system where you can have an outcome greater than the sum of its parts. Matter of fact, go and review Calvinist, whatever they are, however people can be found under that identity. They can't even agree over the latest in the last 40 years, young versus old earth, because they can't, like each opposing side, evaluate their side and come out and produce an outcome greater than the sum of both of those parts. So that's why I would say, and I've always or begun to ask, should scholars so seldom switch sides? No, they should do more frequently. And if you change those, where I'm from, the real world, if you take this, for example, like inventory turns, but if you were to do this more frequently, you would solve the problems much more. Let's say you stuck with a construct. Well, you rode that horse too long. Let's say you waited 30 years before you decided to be a old earther, or 30 years before you decided to be a young earther. If you did that more quickly and went back and forth and evaluated both sides, eventually you'd find something greater than both of those, which we've demonstrated that as well. Dr. Penn noticed that, and we've done numerous ones. So here we have pistuo, verbal stems. We've had the axiom. We noticed in John 20:31. We've got too many lessons on that to call your attention to that. But you'll see in the King James, our Bible, believe and believing, in that same text, same verse. This is the point of action. This is the purpose of the Gospel of John be written. And in it, Jesus even said he laid down life. So there's Jesus' death. There's what would happen to Jesus. All that's in there for someone to be persuaded. And then the verb stems, let's just take this. You'll hear the free will. I've just heard of this scandal with a legalist named Steve Lawson. He was caught up in legalism and always seemed to be very fixated on a particular feature of immorality around which his life became centered, and he became such a famous advocate against one particular fixation that he said was just so dangerous. But in all this, now that his popularity is higher than it's ever been, which I guess that was his aim originally, but legalism will always prevail. Grace will carry you through, and legalism will bury you in it. So, but he was making a comment about free will. There's those who are, for it or against it. Again, that's really not anything that, if you would evaluate the term, you'd learn that in the Hebrew language, for example, there's hifil, and hafal. This is a causal active, and this hafal is a causal passive. You can look this up. It's really blueletterbible.org is excellent source for non-Greek Hebrew users, but you are using it when you interact with software, and you find out we're a causal agent, causal being. God himself recorded in the Bible in Exodus, I think chapter 4, talking with Moses. Moses is apprehensive about how will I persuade them, convince them that you appeared to me out here in the desert and communicated to me this mission of going to be the deliverer for the Hebrew slaves. And he told him, take the staff and cast it down. It became a serpent. He said, take it up. It returned to being a staff. And he said, do this, and they might cause themselves to believe. So we're persuadable, and we learned that in the Bible. We learned Galatians 5:8. There was another persuasion. So these people who were born again, baptized believers, that is, called out. They were even called out and come out and severed their ties through what we call scriptural baptism by an ecclesia, and there they were covenanted together, living an unsurpassed life as Gentiles in a covenant relationship in what we know as a New Testament church to be under the headship of Christ. And another persuasion, Paul said, which was not from God, Galatians 5:8. They were being led away so quickly that even the Holy Spirit who inspired Paul said, now tell them how you marvel at how soon they were removed, transposed. So the idea that a person, unless they're regenerated, can't be persuaded to believe is nowhere in the Bible. But again, this is why you can't improve a construct. There's nothing to study except to just echo and have it like we'd call it an echo chamber. Not only it's going on in your head, but you're just going along. For example, if I had been, let's say, in Steve Lawson's class, if someone told me he was a teacher maybe, and he taught in a seminary, what would we do if we were just good students and ask, what about the causal agency as expressly stated in our Hebrew chart for our strong verbs? I don't know. I just go along with the construct. So we don't even need paradigms. So we don't even need strong verb charts. And then if you're in the Greek class and you say, hey, these inflectional morphemes and all this inflection and all this conjugation and all these declensions in these nouns and this lexicography and this syntax and now this lexical syntactic analysis, shouldn't we all be noticing what's glaring at us from the text, that this is simple action in Galatians 2:16 with the persuasive factor not being regeneration, but being noticing the gospel, the good news about how to stand right before God? It's just, it would be difficult for anyone, because I don't know why someone would go to a school of any kind where you would just be handed off construct to then go parrot and repeat, except it has an economic codependency and something, the aspiration and ambition might have more to do with economics than evangelism. Evangelism meaning a correct announcing, or correctly announcing. So you have a blessed day, but this is it. I hope the illustration works, and I hope you notice you may not know much Bible, as I put up here. You'll just know more Bible than any religious person you'll ever meet. So you have a blessed day and enjoy this lesson.